The story of the tragedy at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy, Essex, is one of the most shocking and infamous crime stories in modern Britain. This tragedy, which occurred in 1985, shocked not only the small rural community, but also the whole country, becoming a symbol of horror and loss. This story begins with a seemingly ordinary English farming family whose life has suddenly turned into a nightmare. The White House farm was located in a quiet corner of the Essex countryside. It was a typical English farm, with green fields, well-kept houses, and an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. The Bamber family lived here, consisting of parents Neville and June, their son Jeremy, and their adopted daughter Sheila with her two young twin sons. At first glance, the family looked prosperous and harmonious, but behind this idyllic picture there were dark and destructive forces. The Bamber family, who lived on the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy, consisted of 5 people, each of whom left his mark on this tragic story. Let's take a closer look at each family member. Neville Bamber was the head of the family. He was a respected man in the community, known for his commitment to farming and the farm he ran on the White House farm. Neville was a man of strict rules and firm beliefs, which made him a very authoritative figure both in the family and among acquaintances. He received a good education, and his business acumen helped him successfully manage the farm, which was passed down to him from previous generations. However, despite his outward strength and confidence, Neville often faced strained family relationships, especially with children who did not always share his views on life. June Bamber, Neville's wife, was a devout woman, deeply religious and actively involved in the life of the local church. She was known for her piety and charitable work. June was a foster mother to 2 children, Sheila and Jeremy, whom she and Neville adopted when they were babies. Raising foster children was not easy for her. She was a strict, sometimes even harsh mother, which caused the children to feel misunderstood and distant. Her relationship with her daughter Sheila, who suffered from mental disorders, was especially difficult. Despite her religious beliefs, June sometimes struggled with depression and feelings of hopelessness, especially when it came to family problems. Sheila Bamber, sometimes called God's angel, was the adopted daughter of Neville and June. Her life was full of complexities and dramatic twists. Sheila showed creative abilities from an early age and dreamed of a modeling career, which she managed to realize to some extent. She was an incredibly beautiful woman. However, her life was overshadowed by some problems. She suffered from schizophrenia, and she was even hospitalized several times due to exacerbations of the disease. From a previous marriage, Sheila gave birth to 2 twin sons, but the marriage broke up due to her unstable mental state. According to a close circle of the family, Sheila once told her mother about periodically disturbing thoughts in which she kills her boys. But despite her illnesses, Sheila tried to be a good mother. She loved her children and often left them in the care of her grandparents because of her inability to take care of them all the time. Jeremy Bamber, Sheila's brother, was a man of complex character. Despite his privileged upbringing, his relationship with his family has always been strained. Jeremy showed no interest in farming and the family business, preferring to lead a more carefree lifestyle. He was known for his promiscuous sexual relationships and love of luxury, which often put him in conflict with his parents, especially with his father, who expected more responsibility from him. Unlike his sister Sheila, Jeremy did not suffer from obvious mental problems, but his personality was characterized by narcissism and manipulativeness. He was in full view of the locals, and his behavior was often condemned. Nicholas and Daniel were Sheila's children, 2 young boys who became innocent victims of the tragedy at the White House farm. Being only 6 years old, they did not have time to fully realize and understand the family conflicts that surrounded them from early childhood. Both boys often spent time with their grandparents, who took care of them at times when Sheila could not fulfill her parental responsibilities. Despite their youth, Nicholas and Daniel were curious and active children who loved spending time on the farm, where they could play outdoors and enjoy the simple joys of rural life. The Bamber family was a respected and prosperous family who lived on the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy, a small picturesque town in Essex, England. The farm was a large and prosperous farm run by Neville Bamber, the head of the family. Together with his wife, June, he created a cozy home and a successful business that won the respect of local residents. At the time of the tragedy, Neville and June Bamber were at an advanced age. They led a quiet life, devoting themselves to taking care of the farm and taking care of their daughter Sheila, who, after divorcing her husband, raised 2 twin sons. Sheila often came with the children to the farm, where she found peace and support in the family. Sheila worked successfully in the modeling business for a while, but over time her career declined. After several unsuccessful attempts to return to the modeling business, Sheila began to experience serious mental problems. She suffered from schizophrenia and had to undergo periodic treatment in psychiatric clinics. Despite this, her parents loved her and tried to support her in every possible way.
Depression. On two different occasions, 1955 and 1958, June was submitted into a psychiatric hospital.
Unlike his sister, Jeremy did not find himself in any business. He lacked the discipline and ambition to run the family business, but he willingly took advantage of the fruits of other people's labor. His interest in the farm and family affairs manifested itself only in one aspect: in matters of money. However, there were serious problems behind the outer calmness of the Bamber family. Jeremy, who seemed outwardly good-natured and friendly, was actually deeply unhappy. He was annoyed by his dependence on his parents and their control over his life. He envied his sister, who, despite her problems, remained the center of attention of the family. But most of all, he was angry that control over the family finances was in the hands of his father. This envy, accumulated discontent, and greed led Jeremy to start thinking about how to take control of the family fortune into his own hands.
Adopted, so I think he felt a little unwanted and not sure of where he belonged and just kind of floating in the world.
The night of August 6th to 7th, 1985, began for the Bamber family as an ordinary warm summer evening in the quiet English village of Tolleshunt D'Arcy. However, the tranquility of this place was soon disrupted by events that forever changed the lives of those associated with the White House farm. Late in the evening, around midnight, terrible events began in the house. Neville and June were sleeping peacefully in their rooms when gunshots broke the silence. The police would later establish that Neville Bamber, despite his 61 years, tried desperately to resist the attacker. Signs of a struggle indicated that he was the first to be attacked. He received several wounds and tried to fight back despite his severe wounds, but was eventually killed in the kitchen. Then the killer moved upstairs, where June was sleeping. Like her husband, she met her death in her own bedroom. Investigators will later determine that she probably woke up and tried to defend herself, but was unable to resist. The killer showed no mercy. The next victims were Sheila's sons, Daniel and Nicholas. Both boys, who were only 6 years old, were shot dead in their beds. Whoever committed this crime clearly had no remorse for destroying innocent lives. Finally, the last victim was Sheila, and it was her death that would later become the key moment in solving this case. At this time, Jeremy Bamber, being in his house a few kilometers from the farm, according to his own testimony, received an alarm call from his father, Neville. Jeremy said Neville, in a panic, informed him of the home invasion. Jeremy immediately called the station to call for help, and then went to the farm himself. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they found a terrifying picture. The house was quiet, all the windows and doors were closed from the inside, which looked suspicious. The police could not immediately get inside, which increased the sense of impending disaster. Eventually, they found a way to enter the house through one of the windows and faced a bloody scene that shocked even the most experienced officers. The bodies of all the family members were scattered around the house. Neville's body was on the kitchen floor, and the bodies of June, Sheila, and 2 boys were on the second floor. The crime scene indicated the randomness and brutality of the attack. But what aroused the most suspicion was the position of Sheila's body and the weapon found next to her. It lay in such a way that the investigators had no doubt to put forward the first version of the crime quite quickly. Sheila, being in a psychotic state, killed her family and then committed suicide. This version was supported by her history of mental disorders. However, as the investigation progressed, new details were revealed that made this version less and less plausible. At first, the police accepted the version that Sheila, being in a state of deep psychosis, killed her entire family and committed suicide. This hypothesis seemed logical, given her diagnosis and previously documented cases of nervous breakdowns. However, as investigators began to examine the evidence and interrogate witnesses, doubts began to arise. The first thing that caught the police's attention was the strange location of the weapon at the crime scene. The weapon was next to Sheila's body, but its position seemed unnatural. Ballistics experts and criminologists soon determined that it was unlikely that she could commit suicide after such a bloody massacre. In addition, there were no traces of gunpowder on her hands, which also cast doubt on the suicide theory.
prosecution case was that Sheila could not have killed herself using the silencer and then removed it and have it later found in a cupboard.
The police also noticed that the doors and windows of the house were locked from the inside. How could an unknown criminal leave the house without leaving any signs of forced entry? Or perhaps he was still inside when Jeremy allegedly received a call from his father. Research on Jeremy's phone records has also proved controversial. The time of the call and the time when he allegedly arrived at the farm did not match, which caused even more suspicion. Moreover, Jeremy's behavior in the days after the murders seemed unnatural. Detectives noticed that he did not show the degree of grief and shock expected from a man who had lost his entire family in such terrible circumstances. Meanwhile, the police began interviewing Jeremy's friends and acquaintances, and soon new evidence emerged. It turned out that Jeremy was leading a double life. He often came into conflict with his parents and sister, and according to some witnesses, talked about his desire to receive the inheritance that he would receive after their death. The investigation into the murders at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy continued, and as the police delved into the details, the picture of events began to change. What at first seemed like an obvious case of family tragedy gradually turned into a confusing and dark story of betrayal and greed. One of the first factors that led the police to doubt the original version of events was the examination of the crime scene. Criminologists who studied the position of the bodies and weapons began to put forward hypotheses that contradict the official version that Sheila Bamber killed her parents, children, and then herself. The position of the gun next to her body was unnatural for a man who committed suicide. Moreover, no traces of gunpowder were found on her body, which indicated that she most likely was not holding a weapon in her hands at the time of the shot. Forensic experts also noted the absence of Sheila's fingerprints on the gun, which further increased suspicions. If she really used a gun to kill her family, why were there no traces of her on it? Another important element was the testimony of witnesses who knew Jeremy Bamber. Over time, new details emerged about his behavior and his relationship with his family. Friends and acquaintances began to tell the police about the conflicts that often occurred between Jeremy and his parents. It is known that Jeremy did not get along with Neville and June. They often argued about money and the management of the family business. The police also found out that Jeremy was leading a double life, which his family probably did not know about. Despite the fact that outwardly he seemed to be a devoted son and brother, he actually made far-reaching plans to seize the family fortune. Jeremy had significant debts, and his lifestyle required a lot of money, which he could not afford without the help of his parents. After the murders, Jeremy Bamber's behavior became another important factor in the investigation. In the first days after the tragedy, he did not show the emotions that one would expect from a man who had lost his entire family. On the contrary, he was calm and even indifferent, which aroused the suspicions of investigators and family members. Witnesses noted that Jeremy quickly took over the management of family affairs and began to arrange his life as if nothing had happened. He did not avoid the attention of the press, gave interviews, and even seemed pleased with the fame he received. These actions did not correspond to the image of a grieving relative, which further strengthened the investigators' confidence that he could have been involved in the crime. Jeremy's behavior on those nights when, according to him, he received a call from his father, attracted special attention from the police. Phone records showed that the time of the call and the time when Jeremy allegedly arrived at the farm did not match. Moreover, during the check it became clear that the call itself could have been staged to create an alibi for Jeremy. As investigators analyzed all the details of the case, it became increasingly clear to them that Jeremy Bamber could have a strong motive for killing his family. He understood that the only way to get an inheritance and get rid of financial problems was to kill his parents and sister. Sheila, in his opinion, was an ideal candidate for the role of guilty, since her mental state was already causing concern to her family and others. Jeremy carefully planned his crime, hoping that the police would accept the version of the mass murder committed by Sheila. However, he did not take into account all the little things, and it was these shortcomings that played against him. Investigators began to ask questions about why Jeremy turned out to be the only surviving family member, why his alibi did not match the time frame of the crime, and why he was in such a hurry to take over the management of family affairs. The police also found out that Jeremy, despite his calm demeanor, expressed dissatisfaction with his parents several times and talked about the inheritance in a negative context. Several family friends reported that he hinted that it would be easier for him to live if he got control of the farm and money. This data allowed the police to gather enough evidence to arrest Jeremy Bamber. However, this was only the first step on the long road to justice. Jeremy continued to insist on his innocence, and there was a long and difficult trial ahead in which the prosecution had to prove that he had killed his family in cold blood. Jeremy Bamber's motive for killing his family was primarily financial. He sought to gain control of the family fortune, which included the White House farm, significant cash and assets that belonged to his parents totaling more than $500,000. Jeremy was mired in debt and led a luxurious lifestyle that required a lot of money. Realizing that his parents would not allow him to completely manage the family resources, he decided to get rid of everyone who could prevent him from receiving a full inheritance.
Would suggest that he does have a personality disorder. Yeah, it's perfectly reasonable and possible that he had the motive.
In addition, Jeremy felt deep dissatisfaction with his parents and sister. He believed that they limited his freedom and opportunities, as well as hindered his financial ambitions. The psychological stress in the family probably pushed him to take radical action. By killing his family, he intended to create the appearance that his sister Sheila, who suffered from mental problems, committed mass murder and then committed suicide. In this case, the entire inheritance would automatically pass to Jeremy, allowing him to solve his financial problems and live the way he always wanted. Thus, greed, financial difficulties, and deep-rooted dissatisfaction with the family became the main motives of Jeremy Bamber for committing these terrible crimes. After the tragic night at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy, the investigation took on a large scale. During the first weeks, police and investigators focused on the theory that Sheila Bamber, who suffered from schizophrenia, killed her family and committed suicide. However, as the investigation progressed, more and more evidence began to point to Jeremy Bamber, the only surviving family member. The trial against Jeremy Bamber began in October 1986 and became one of the most high-profile cases in the UK at that time. The focus turned out to be not only evidence and testimony, but also the lifestyle of the accused, his character and motives that could have prompted him to commit such a terrible crime. The prosecutor's office presented numerous pieces of evidence that cast doubt on the original version of Sheila's suicide. One of the key clues was the statement of the police officers who arrived at the crime scene. Did they pay attention to how a woman who decided to commit suicide could shoot herself twice? Obviously, after the first shot, the pain is so deafening that it will take superhuman strength to make the second one. And the fact that the window on the ground floor, through which, according to the defense, Sheila could get into the house, was closed from the inside. This contradicted the defense's version that Sheila allegedly entered the house after barricading herself inside. It was also important that the weapons used in the murders were in Sheila's hands in such a way that it would have been difficult for her to commit suicide herself. Experts noted that there were no traces of Sheila's blood on the handle of the gun, although this would have been expected if she had shot herself. Moreover, traces of Jeremy were found on the weapons and ammunition, which increased suspicions against him. Witness testimony also played an important role in the case. The police provided a recording of a phone conversation that Jeremy had with a police officer on the night of the murders. In this conversation, Jeremy seemed to be too calm and did not show the emotion and anxiety that would be expected from a man whose family had just been killed. Jeremy also claimed to the end that his mentally ill sister Sheila was the culprit.
And has always maintained that his adoptive sister, Sheila Caffell, a paranoid schizophrenic.
Special attention was paid to financial issues. It was established that Jeremy was in a difficult financial situation. He was dependent on his parents and had no stable source of income. Destroying the entire family could give him full control of the farm and the inheritance. Prosecutors also presented testimony from Jeremy's friends and acquaintances, who claimed that he had previously expressed thoughts about how it would be good to get rid of the family in order to get their money. However, the most convincing evidence was the confession of Jeremy's ex-girlfriend, Julia McGinney. She claimed that Jeremy confessed to her of his plans to kill the family in order to get their fortune. In her testimony, Julia described how Jeremy talked about his plan with cold calculation, which shocked her. According to Julia, at first she did not take Jeremy's words seriously, considering them just drunken fantasies, but after the tragedy she realized that he was telling the truth. The defense tried to discredit Julia's testimony, claiming that she was taking revenge on Jeremy for breaking up their relationship and was simply lying. However, the court found no reason to doubt the veracity of her testimony. The trial lasted several weeks, and as it progressed, it became clear that more and more evidence pointed to Jeremy as the culprit. The prosecutor's office skillfully linked together evidence, testimony, and motives, painting before the court and the jury a picture of a cold-blooded and calculating killer who was ready to destroy his family for money. The culmination of the trial was the performance of Jeremy Bamber himself. His defense was based on denying his guilt and claiming that he was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. However, his behavior in the dock only increased the jury's doubts about his innocence. Jeremy showed himself to be arrogant and self-confident, which contrasted with the image of a man who had lost his entire family. In the end, the jury returned a verdict. Jeremy Bamber was found guilty of the murders of his parents, sister, and nephews. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the right to early release. This trial was a landmark in British criminal history, as it not only revealed one of the most horrific tragedies in the Bamber family, but also showed how deeply the motives leading to such terrible crimes can be hidden. After the horrific murders at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy, this quiet and secluded farm became not only the scene of the tragedy, but also the source of many legends and myths that surrounded it in the following years. One of the most famous legends is related to ghosts and strange phenomena that are said to have started happening on the farm after the murders. According to legend, a few months after the tragedy, people passing by the farm began to report strange sounds and visions. Villagers claimed that at night one could hear muffled screams and children crying coming from the house, which had been empty for a long time. Others reported seeing shadows of people in the windows, even though the farm was sealed and no one was there. The figure of a woman who allegedly wandered around the farm was especially often mentioned. Locals believed that this was the spirit of Sheila Bamber, who could not find peace after death. It was said that she sometimes appeared on the path leading to the house, or stood at the window, looking at visitors with sadness in her eyes. Sometimes she was allegedly seen with two small ghost figures of her murdered twin sons. Legend had it that Sheila's spirit was supposedly trying to warn people about the presence of evil in this place. Some believed that she was trying to convey the truth about what happened on the farm that terrible night, and that her soul could not find peace until justice prevailed. Some visitors who ventured to the farm told of strange sensations of cold, even on warm days, and of an inexplicable feeling of fear that seized them when approaching the house. There were also many cases when equipment, such as cameras or mobile phones, refused to work near the house, and the batteries ran out in just a few minutes. Others claimed that gunshots could be heard echoing and footsteps could be heard on the farm, as if someone were treading heavily on a creaking floor. These sounds, according to eyewitnesses, were as if frozen in time, and returned every night at the same time, recalling the tragedy that occurred within the walls of this house. These legends and rumors have made the White House farm a place of pilgrimage for paranormal enthusiasts and urban legend researchers. However, for many, especially those who were close to the Bamber family, these stories served as a reminder that the evil committed that night left a deep mark not only in people's memories, but also, perhaps, in the very fabric of reality. Despite the years that have passed since the crime, the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy continues to attract attention, remaining a symbol of an unsolved mystery and a tragedy that will never be forgotten. Legends about ghosts and strange phenomena on the farm have become part of local folklore, preserving the memory of terrible events that happened here once. The tragedy at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy had significant consequences both for the surviving family members and for society as a whole. The deaths of Neville, June, Sheila, and two young boys shocked the local community and sparked a massive investigation that led to the arrest and conviction of Jeremy Bamber for the murder of his entire family. The public reaction was strong shock and disbelief combined with a desire for justice. Local residents and journalists closely followed the investigation and the trial itself became one of the most discussed criminal stories in the UK. The trial and subsequent conviction of Jeremy Bamber led to his life in prison without parole. Horrific details were revealed during the trial, which only increased public condemnation of his actions. After the tragedy, the White House farm became a symbol of horror and family tragedy. Despite attempts to sell and restore the farm has not been able to get rid of its gloomy reputation, and its fate has remained uncertain. The impact on law enforcement agencies was also significant. The case became a precedent that emphasized the importance of thorough investigations and careful attention to detail in such cases. Ultimately, the tragedy at the White House farm left an indelible mark on the history of British justice and became a reminder of how family conflicts and personal ambitions can lead to the most terrible consequences. The tragedy at the White House farm in Tolleshunt D'Arcy remains one of the most shocking and tragic stories in the British crime chronicle. Murders committed in the family circle, in a seemingly safe place, highlight how deeply hidden conflicts and personal ambitions can destroy lives. This story is not only about crime and punishment, but also about the devastating consequences that can arise when trust and family closeness turn into betrayal and cruelty. The story of the White House Farm is a warning that evil can lurk where you least expect it. Ultimately, this tragedy calls us to think about how important it is to be attentive to those around us, and not ignore the warning signs that can save lives.